Dear friends, chapter 30. You ready? I'll just share with you from the get-go that I'm very, very biased and impartial about this chapter. It's a very special chapter for me. Some people connect to different ideas, to different teachings. This chapter is very, very meaningful for me. Let's get a little bit of our bearings, and then we'll see what we're doing over here in this chapter. A very big theme that is being developed in this section of Tanya, which really, really began last chapter, chapter 29, is the importance of making the mental and emotional shift from seeing life from the perspective of our animal soul to seeing life from the perspective of our godly divine soul. And you see, there's an interesting paradox here. When we speak about the two souls, we all have two souls, but there's a very interesting paradox. On the one hand, who's the real you? Which soul is the real you? The real you is the godly soul. At the core of your identity is the godly soul. Like this is what we spoke about at the very end of chapter 29, right? Just last week we learned about this. That the real Jew is the godly soul. The animal soul is only a superficial layer. It's a facade. It's not the real you. The real core you is your godly soul, not your animal soul. And yet, the paradox is that the main soul, on a conscious level, on a manifest level, on a basic biological level, what is the life that we are living? We are living the life of the animal soul. Who are we? If we want to be honest with ourselves, and we went through this conversation in chapter 29, on a conscious level, on an active level, we are the animal soul. So it's an interesting dynamic over here. The real me is the godly soul, and yet it is harder for me to really live my life from my godly soul. My animal soul is not the real me. The animal soul is my facade. It's a spacesuit. It's an outer layer of who I am. And yet that is the life I live by default. The default life is my animal soul. And what the Alter Rebbe says is, a healthy Jew is a Jew who understands that and makes an effort to try to break away from the perspective, from the feelings, from the default posture of the animal soul, and to try to identify more with the outlook of the godly soul. Last chapter, we spoke about the importance of overcoming the natural arrogance and the natural ego of the animal soul. In the last chapter, we spoke about a condition of where the arrogance of the animal soul, and we all suffer from the ego and the arrogance and the pride and the self-centeredness of the animal soul. We all have that. We're all human. And yet, sometimes it can get to such an unhealthy level, to such an unhealthy degree, that it really gets in the way of the godly soul being able to function, from basic functionality of the godly soul. So we spoke about how there's a need to actively break the arrogance and break the ego and break the chutzpah, we use the word chutzpah, of the animal soul, to try to get back and allow the godly soul to shine forth again. Chapter 30 is going to continue on that theme and teach us another area of life where it's so vital to change the way we would naturally see it from the arrogant perspective of the animal soul and to start seeing things from the perspective of the godly soul. What is it? The way we look at other people. One of the techniques that the animal soul has to make itself feel good. The animal soul loves feeling good. The animal soul needs to pacify itself. The animal soul doesn't want to feel like a mess. The animal soul doesn't want to feel like a bad person. The animal soul, right? The animal soul wants to feel good about itself. So sometimes the way the animal soul is going to feel good about itself is by eating ice cream, right? Taking ice cream out of the freezer and just eating a cup of ice cream. Sometimes the animal soul, what it will do to make itself feel good about itself is put down another person. And we call that being judgmental. Why are human beings so judgmental? I think it's very simple, because we all have an animal soul. The animal soul wants to feel good about itself, and one of the ways how we feel good about ourselves is by building up our own ego by saying, look at that person, they're so horrible, and they did this, and they do that. I'm not like that, I'm better than that. And it gives your animal soul this possibility of kind of being able to like lift itself up. It gives it a spine to work with. That's the arrogance of the animal soul. We all have it. We all have that sense of judgmentalism. Now, being judgmental is especially something, it's a little bit of a trap that people could fall into as they grow, as they do the heavy lifting, to grow in their Yiddishkeit, to grow in their morality, in their spirituality. And as somebody will grow in their Yiddishkeit, all of a sudden they'll notice how other people are so lacking and are so behind. And all of a sudden they'll be like, that's crazy. Well, what's up with this guy? This guy, he never does this, he never does that. That guy has so much money, he never gives any charity. And that guy, look, he doesn't give a Jewish education to his children. I don't know, it could be anything. And we do that. Whether we say it to other people, or even if we just think it to ourselves. We're judgmental of other people. The whole idea of this chapter is, the theme of this chapter is that we, as the author is going to be educating us, how we should have a healthy humility, a healthy inferiority even, before all other people. You don't look down at other people, but in a certain way you're always looking up at people. Have that humility before all people. That's going to be the theme. And dear friends, I think in this chapter of Tanya, you will see the seeds and the roots of what today is known as the non-judgmentalism of Chabad. Chabad has a name, has a brand. We're non-judgmental. Some would say Chabad does it because it's good business. It's a good tactic. If you want to get people in the door, I guess, I've never tried otherwise, but I imagine you'll turn off more people if you're very judgmental, and you'll create a more welcoming atmosphere if you're less judgmental. So it's good business, but that's not the reason. The reason is because there's real philosophy here. There's a real philosophy. How does Hasidus, how does Chabad, how does the Rebbe teach us how to see another person? And this chapter 30, is truly what teaches us the healthy way how to see another person. So on the one hand, this chapter is a little bit, it's developing humility, inferiority even. So it's ego crushing. It's again, we're trying to deflate the ego, but it's still so inspiring. It's a very empowering chapter. So dear friends, let us do some inside learning. Let us start learning the chapter. We'll get about halfway through the chapter, and this is not the full chapter in the handout. We still have more to go. So it's going to take us 2 weeks to learn the chapter, this week and next week. All right, dear friends, part 1 of the chapter, why you cannot judge others. Says the Alter Rebbe, here's another piece of advice that you should take to heart. If you want to develop to a healthy place spiritually, and if you want to get to a place that your godly soul is able to shine, here's an important piece of advice. You need to fulfill the instruction of our rabbis to be humble before every human being. This is a teaching from Pirkei Avot, from the ethics of our fathers. And it says, be humble before every human being. The basic Jewish value of humility. Be humble. Okay. When people hear this teaching, be humble before every human being. Be humble. Humility is somewhat popular these days, right? No one likes somebody who's just too arrogant and full of himself. So it's like even social etiquette. Don't boast too much. And there are even people who carry themselves in a humble way. But it's an act. It's a show. The joke? There's a joke that once in a synagogue, it was Yom Kippur, in the height of Yom Kippur prayer. And the rabbi, all of a sudden, in a public display, on the stage, in the whole shul, he drops himself to the ground and prostrates himself before the Aron Kodesh, before the Holy Ark, and says, God, before you, I am like nothing. Psh, so inspiring. And then the chazan all of a sudden drops to the ground and says, God, before you, I'm like a nothing. In the shul in the back, there's a simple Jew, and he was a janitor. He was so inspired, he was so moved. So all of a sudden he drops to the ground and he screams, God, before you, I'm like nothing. And the rabbi and the chazan turn around and they say, who does he think he is to say that he's a nothing? Who does he think he is? But I thought they were saying that they're like a nothing, right? That's humility. When some people learned this instruction from our rabbis, be humble, and they say it means act humble. Act with humility. Even if you know you're better than other people, social etiquette, it's not nice. It's not refined to just be full of yourself, to be on airs in front of other people. So act with humility. Be gracious to other people, be considerate to other people, let other people go before you. Right? Don't be too haughty. Act humble. But says the Alter Rebbe, that's not what it means. The Alter Rebbe, we already know by now, he loves truth. What does the Alter Rebbe say? Let's read what the Alter Rebbe says. They didn't mean that you should pretend. They meant you should really be humbled with utter sincerity. Don't act with humility. Be humble. Oh, that's very different. When their sages say be humble, it doesn't mean put up a show. It doesn't mean do an act. It means feel something. Feel different. A Jew has to reach a place where they sincerely look at another Jew and they're humbled by the other Jew. That's a whole different thing. And says the Alter Rebbe, and they meant before every human being, literally, even before the lowest person imaginable. Right? This isn't hyperbole. This isn't just a theoretical value slogan bumper sticker. It's not a nice, cute Jewish value that you could preach from the pulpit. It's a real thing. Our sages want that a Jew should really feel before every human being, even the lowest person you could look at. And the worst moral and spiritual sage, and say, I'm humbled before that person. That's a tall order. How do you get that? How could you reach such a place? Our sages expect this of us. They tell us in the ethics of our fathers, be humble. So how do you do that? Some people it's easy to feel humility of. They're greater than you. You look at them and you see right away you have a lot to learn from them. You look at them, you see right away, I have so much to grow to get there. Some people you look at and right away you see they are in a very inferior place, morally, spiritually, in Judaism, whatever it is. And our sages say, no, you look at that person, and you should say, I'm humbled by that person. I have what to learn from that person. I feel inferior to that person. So again, if it meant put on an act, okay, that's fine. That's reasonable. But the author's saying, no, it means for real. So this is going to be the theme of the chapter. How do we make sense? How do we make heads and tails? How do we even accept this logically, that one should feel humble before another person? Okay, so now we have the agenda. Okay, so the author is going to tell us like this. And if I want you to see that this chapter, it's a very, very organized chapter, and there's a progression of ideas. The Alter Rebbe is only going to get us to understand how to truly feel humility before another Jew at the end of the chapter. But first, the Alter Rebbe is going to give us a few steps in order to get there. We're going to go on a little journey. This chapter consists of 3 different ideas, and each idea builds off of the previous one. And each idea is even more radical and takes us further into understanding why we should feel humble before another Jew. It says the Alter like this. How is it possible to do this with utter sincerity? Right? How is it possible to be humble with utter sincerity? Says the Alter Rebbe, by pondering another teaching of our rabbis. Let's first begin with a different teaching. Quote, don't judge another person until you reach his place. Don't we all know that saying, right? It's even an English proverb, right? Don't judge another until you walk in his shoes, right? Is that what it is? But this is where it comes from. It comes from our sages. The Mishnah is the earliest source of this. Don't judge another person until you reach his place. Says the Alter Rebbe, you want to know why? Because it's his very place that is causing him to sin. You know why you shouldn't judge another Jew? Because you're not in his place. And his place is what's causing him to be this type of person. In other words, circumstance. They're circumstances. You can't compare 2 people's circumstances. Even though on the outside it looks like you look a lot better than somebody else, But when you start looking at the circumstances, all of a sudden the playing field changes. Let's read what the Alter Rebbe says. It could be you're looking at another Jew, and let's say this other Jew is in a horrible place morally and spiritually, and he does sins and he does who knows what. And you look at him and say, what a low life. Look at this person, has zero self-control, they're in such bad shape. Says the Alter Rebbe, 1 second, let's consider what's happening over here. It could be that he makes a living walking around the marketplace the whole day. Right? Where does he have to make a living? He has to make a living in the marketplace. And his social circle is with those that sit at the street corners. And his eyes see every temptation. The Alter says, 1 second, let's take into account who this person is. This person doesn't have the luxury of staying out of trouble. The only way that he was able to make money, he has to go and be a vendor and be a haggler and be a peddler in the marketplace. So he's spending a whole day in the marketplace. And the marketplace is not the best environment for a Jew. There's a lot of temptations in the marketplace. Now it's interesting, today we don't really understand what a marketplace looks like, but a marketplace used to be, I'm saying, the marketplace was everything in one little square. So you have the town's loiterers, and you have the anti-Semites, and you have the prostitutes. you've got the whole range of trouble in the city hanging out in the marketplace. And this Jew, you know where he has to be the whole day? He has to sit in the marketplace all day. And you know who his social circle is because of that? Those that sit at the street corners, the loiterers, the lowlifes of society. And there's a lot of gossip being spoken. And his eyes are constantly being fed the stimuli of temptation, the stimuli of sin. And the Alter says, and when the eyes see, the heart lusts. Human nature is that when the eye takes in certain visuals, the heart reacts. So the Alter says we have to just consider what's happening over here. This is a Jew. He doesn't have the luxury of staying out of trouble. A whole day he's surrounded by an environment and by visuals and by temptations. We have to take that into account. That's his practical circumstance. But the Alter now adds another layer. There's also another layer. There's also something called your spiritual circumstances, your spiritual place. And also, you don't stand in his spiritual place, in his spiritual circumstances. Says the Alter Rebbe, additionally, we're on page 226. Additionally, his spiritual place is also a factor. It could be that the passions of his Yetzer Hara is especially intense, burning inside like an oven heated by a baker. As the prophet Hosea puts it, burning like a flaming fire. The Alter says it could be, forget about his circumstances where he spends his day, his spatial circumstances. Let's even speak about his circumstances on the inside. We all have a Yetzer Hara. We all have an evil inclination that has temptations. But you can't compare two people's Yetzer Haras. First of all, what turns on? What makes your Yetzer Hara tick? What makes your evil inclination tick? Some people are very, very passionately hot-blooded for pleasure, for the world's pleasures, for temptations. Other people, that's not where the Yetzer Hara, that's not the weakness of your Yetzer Hara. Every evil inclination is different, and each one has a different appetite for different types of trouble. Also, some Yetzer Haras are very dispassionate and not so strong, not so intense. They make trouble, but they're not the big troublemakers. Some people, God gave them a Yetzer Hara that has such energy, and it's a real force. It's a force to be reckoned with. And what the Alter Rebbe quotes here is a verse from Hosea, actually two verses, that this Yetzer Hara is like an oven heated by a baker, like a baker's oven, which burns with a flaming fire. See, some Yetzer Haras are like a home oven, and some Yetzer Haras are like a baker's oven. What's the difference between a home oven and a baker's oven? You all know that you don't walk into a bakery and you don't see a regular home oven there, right? A home oven doesn't do it for a baker. A home oven is good, but a home oven is not that strong. It's strong, but not that strong. And a home oven is not meant to be ongoing, on and cooking away a whole day. A home oven is meant to be used once a day, twice a day. Twice a day you fire it up and then you turn it off. A baker's oven, it's meant to give out a lot of steam, a lot of energy, and it's constantly being used. Some Yetzer Haras are like a home oven. They've got their heat, but the heat only goes off twice a day, and even then, it's in measure. It's manageable. Some people have a Yetzer Hara, it's like a baker's oven. The whole day, it's putting off steam, and it's got a lot of energy. It's got a lot of power. So the Alter Rebbe says, when you look at another Jew, and you see that, look how bad this Jew looks. I'm a good guy. Look at him. He's morally bankrupt. He's spiritually bankrupt. He's doing every sin in the book. Says the Alter for 1 second. How could you judge? You don't know what this guy has to put up with. You don't know. So you're going to say, "Oh, I look so good." Who said it's a big deal? Big deal that you look good. Stand in his place and then let's see what you look like. Maybe if you would have to face his temptations, you would look even worse. Maybe he's actually doing pretty good for his temptations. This is what the Alter Rebbe continues. Let's continue reading. Meanwhile, says the Alter Rebbe, the one who is doing the judgment, you who wants to judge another Jew, you may spend little time around the marketplace. You're privileged. Lucky you. You've got a lucky fate in life, that your fate is not that you have to run around the marketplace a whole day. And therefore, you are not surrounded. You're sheltered. You're not surrounded by the visuals of temptation. You don't have to have the social circle of the street loiterers. You don't have to sit. You only have to go periodically to the marketplace. Says the Alter Rebbe, most of the day he's sitting at home, sheltered from the outside world. So how could you judge? And also spiritually, says the Alter Rebbe, and even if he does go out to the marketplace the whole day, and let's say you are somebody who spends the whole day in the marketplace, maybe then I could judge the other Jew, because I'm in the exact same circumstances as he is. He's spending a whole day in the marketplace. I'm also spending a whole day in the marketplace. Maybe I could still judge him, says Alter Rebbe. No. It's quite possible that he's just not so passionately hot-blooded by nature. Maybe your Yetzer Hara is not as turned on, and is not as hot-blooded, and is not as passionate, and is not as tempted, and therefore for you it's easier to make good choices. And the Alter explains, not everyone has the same degree of passion within their Yetzer Hara. Some are hot, some are warm, some frigid, as explained elsewhere. So the Alter is saying, you simply don't know what the other person has to put up with. And therefore, you simply can't judge. Why can't you judge? Because you simply have no clue what this other person is going through. Meaning, the Alter is not saying that it's not nice to judge. The Alter is not saying that, it's wrong for a Jew to judge. The Alter is saying, forget about it being not nice. It simply doesn't make sense. It's a falsehood. It's a lie. You can't judge somebody else because you simply don't have his circumstances. What does he have to deal with? What demons does he have to deal with? What trouble does he have inside of him? What does he have to put up with? You have no clue. So you say, I'm successful. Look at me, I'm successful. The other saying, you're not successful necessarily. You just don't have to put up with his fights. If you had to put up with his fights, who said that you would look any better than him? Maybe you are essentially just as weak as he is. The only difference is you don't have to deal with his problems. If you did have to deal with his problems, maybe you would look even worse. So this is step number one. You simply can't judge another person. Why not? You can't judge another person because you don't stand in his place. It's just, you can't judge. So don't come and say, never even feel it. Never even feel superior to somebody else. Want to hear a story? I'll tell you a story. The Alter Rebbe had a son who would eventually succeed him. His name was Rabbi Dubov. Rabbi Dubov of Lubavitch, the second Chabad Rebbe. When Rabbi Dubov was a young man, he was like a newlywed. So he was maybe in his upper teens. Back in those days, people got married in their teen years. They didn't have the luxury to wait around till their 30s. In their 30s, they were worrying about dying. So in the teens, you had to make sure to get married. It was that was simply how it worked those days. So he's in his teens. He's a young man, and he's a very impressive young man. He's going to be the future Rebbe. So And especially because he was a little bit young, he was maybe a drop haughty, a drop arrogant. In any case, he is visiting his in-laws in a different city. And in that city, there was a Chabad chassid, a chassid of his father, a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. And he's in conversation with this chassid. And he is a little bit flexing his prowess, his knowledge, his prowess in spirituality. He's flexing a bit. You know what I'm saying? The chassid right away puts this young man, the Rebbe's son, in his place. He says, 1 second, please. You think you're such a hot shot? You think you're such a hot shot? You can't take any credit for it. Your father is the greatest tzaddik alive, the Alter Rebbe. So your father's a righteous man and your mother's a righteous woman. One can only imagine, or we can't imagine, what type of special kavanah, special intentions they had in their union when they conceived you, and what type of special soul, an elevated, spiritually sensitive soul that they were able to draw down from heaven. They were able to take the choicest, most beautiful soul and bring down that soul as their child. And they raised you in the most beautiful home, surrounded by holiness and Torah study. And you look as good as you do. Big deal. Compare that with me. My father was a simple Jew. My mother was a simple Jew. The soul that they managed to bring down through their union, they got the leftover souls. The souls nobody else wanted, that's my soul that my parents were able to. And do you think my parents were able to raise me properly? We didn't have any money at home. I barely got a Jewish education. And my father worked days and nights. I didn't even see him that much. And he says, you know what? And you, privileged young man, you get to sit and study a whole day. Your father-in-law is supporting you, so you get to sit and study in the shul, and you get to build your knowledge of Torah and your knowledge of Judaism. You know what I have to do? To make ends meet, I'm a money lender to all the farmers, all the Russian peasant farmers. A whole planting season, I go from village to village to village and lend money to the farmers, so like that they could develop their farm and grow the crop and all that. And then comes winter, after the whole season where they were able to develop the field, sell, make money, I then have to go and start collecting all my debts. He says, you know what it looks like? What I need to do is like this. That's what he says. You can't go during daytime. Because daytime people, whatever. The way it works is if you want to talk about business, you have to come in the evening. So he says, me, as most people, when it gets dark, they're going to sleep. Me, I'm up a whole night. I need to go and I have to travel. Every night I got to go to 4 to 5 houses. And the way it works is you got to show up with a bottle of vodka. Because in Russia, there's no business without a bottle of vodka. So I have to go. And I have to knock on the door. And I have to start haggling with this Russian low-life peasant. And we have to sit by his table and we have to each drink a cup of vodka. And if the wife doesn't like you, then you can be thrown out of the house and you're not going to get your money. So I have to sit there and I have to make nice to the wife, and I need to invite the wife and pour a cup of vodka, and I need to entertain them, and I need to speak with them and be nice, and hopefully at the end of the meeting I'll get my money that I'm owed. I have to do this every night, 4 or 5 houses. I come back home in the morning, I barely have time to sleep, and I got to go to shul. You know what my prayer looks like? I'm half falling asleep. I'm dozing off a whole davening. So this is why I don't look as impressive as you. And you, privileged little boy, you're going to show off? Big deal. Big deal. The fact that you look nice at all is not even to your own credit. You take 0 credit. In any case, this chassid gave this young man, the Rebbe's son, Rabbi Dubov, such a beating over the head that Rabbi Dubov felt very broken inside. And he ran back to his father and said, Father, I realize I'm spiritually lacking. And he asked his father, the Alter Rebbe, for some spiritual guidance. In any case, the next time that this chassid visited the Alter Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe says, I owe you a debt of gratitude. You made my little son Beryl into a mensch and into a chassid. You put him in his place in a healthy way. It's essentially the message of this chapter. You think you're so great? You're not great. You're privileged. You are fortunate that God served you a fate of luck that you don't have to deal with real problems. And you're going to judge somebody who does have to go through real problems. Who are you to judge? You simply don't have enough data to be able to judge that other person. So don't judge him. This is the first message of the Alter Rebbe. You simply cannot judge another Jew. Why? Not because it's wrong, not because it's not nice, but because it is simply false. It's logically unsound. Now, the Alter Rebbe now adds a little note. Don't think that this means that the sinner is off the hook. We can't judge the sinner. But the sinner, between him and himself, between him and God, has to know that it's not okay what he's doing. And there's never an excuse for sinning. So nobody could judge me for sinning. But I need to know that I don't have any excuse. Somebody else could have an excuse for me. I can't have an excuse for myself. Right? The author is going to say, 1 second. One Jew can't judge another Jew, but the Jew who sins has to know that he has no excuse. Let's read what the Alter Rebbe says. Bottom page 226. The Alter Rebbe says, although you have no right to judge him, yet the truth is that even this guy who is hot-blooded and makes a living sitting in the street corners all day has no excuse for his sins. So we just gave a whole mouthful of excuses. You know how hard he has to work, and you know that he's surrounded in the marketplace. He has such a bad Yetzer Hara, and his eyes are seeing things, and his heart is reacting to what the eye is seeing. The Alter Rebbe says, no, but he doesn't have an excuse. Why? For he doesn't have the fear of God before his eyes to restrain where his eyes gaze. The Alter Rebbe says, control where you look. How could you control where you look? You could control where you look if you have the fear of God always in front of your eyes. You'll literally control yourself. Even though the eyes is the one tool of the body, it's very difficult to control the eyes. The eyes are always darting around the place. And if there's something which is tempting the eyes, it's very hard to not look there. The Alter Rebbe says, no, but it's expected of you to be able to hold back. And says the Alter Rebbe, and even more than that, and even once he does see some tempting sight, still he should restrain and rein in the spirit of lust in his heart by tapping into that fear of God, who sees all he does. Which means even once the heart does start getting tempted by it, even then, you should squash the lust and the temptation of the heart. Again, because of the fear of God. And the Alter Rebbe says the burning passions in his heart are no excuse. Why? Because, as we said earlier, the brain innately rules over the heart. Brain rules over the heart. You could control yourself. The Alter Rebbe says, look, the way sin happens in a two-step process. Number one, your eyes seize the opportunity, and your eyes seize the temptation. And once the eyes see it, step number two is that the heart starts reacting. And once the heart starts reacting and kind of building up that pressure of the temptation, that's when that makes it much more difficult to withstand the test and the temptation. Says the Alter Rebbe, you need to stop yourself right away at the beginning. Don't even let your eyes see something. That's the first thing. The first thing is you're a sinner. You're at fault because you're even allowing your eyes to see it. But then step two is, even if you didn't let your eyes see it, and even if already your heart's reacting, even then, stop your heart from reacting. You could do it. There's a story in the Talmud. The Talmud says this, and it's very interesting that the Talmud says it. There were two sages of the Talmud, and the only vocation that they were able to find to make money, listen to this, they would manufacture the sandals for prostitutes. Okay, this is what the Talmud says. Quite a weird line of work to go into. There's like the lingerie shop. These two sages were the footwear lingerie shop for the prostitutes, which means literally their clientele day in, day out is women who are prostitutes, and are dressed like prostitutes. And they come in and they get a shoe fitting, and they would put together a custom shoe. The Talmud says that these two sages never once in their life looked up to look at their clients. Never once looked upon a prostitute woman. They would sit on the stool in the shop, and the customer would walk in, and they would say, "Okay, put your shoe over here on this stand so that I can measure it." They would never once look up. Now, why does the Talmud tell us this story? With the name. We know the names. We know exactly who the two sages were. I can imagine if somebody had no other choice, but they had to work in a lingerie shop a whole day, serving prostitutes, they would probably, they had to do it to make an honest living. But they probably wouldn't want their kids to find out, right? Don't tell my kids about it. Why is the Talmud recording for posterity that these two sages would make shoes and sandals for prostitutes all day? It's teaching us a message that no matter what our environment is, we could control where we look. It takes willpower, and we need to have the fear of God upon us to stop us and restrain ourselves. But yeah, this is a real thing. So the Alter says like this. We need to know. We need to have personal accountability. If we are slipping and falling and lapsing in an area of sin, in an area of morality, we have no excuse. But, says the Alter Rebbe, but we, to ourselves, there's no excuse. But towards another Jew, no judgment. We need to judge only ourselves, not somebody else. And the key idea of the Alter Rebbe is you simply don't know the circumstances of somebody else. You don't know. You were never in that situation. How could you judge how you could react? How could you judge how you would react? Simple as that. Who said you would look any better? Maybe you would even look any worse. This is step number one. You have no right to judge another Jew. Now says the Alter Rebbe, part two. And part two, we're only going to learn the very beginning of it, just a little bit. So part one is you simply have no right to judge another Jew, which means maybe you are better than that other Jew, and maybe that Jew is inferior to you, but you don't know. You can't judge. Step number two is like this. Part two, what makes you better? It says out something amazing. Let's read. Now, to break the burning passions of the Yetzer Hara due to fear of God really is a major, intense battle, like a real spiritual test. Now, this is 1 second. We have a Jew here who's going through, hypothetically, we're building up this hypothetical scenario. A Jew who has a very, very passionate and a very powerful Yetzer Hara. He's sitting literally a whole day in the marketplace with the worst social circle and with visual stimuli that is hitting him over the head with temptation for sin. But we expect of him, the Torah expects of him to, it's not an excuse. The Torah still expects of him to succeed and to still be a good Jew and to not sin. The Alter says 1 second. That takes a lot of power and energy. That battle, to face the battle against such a strong, burning, fiery, burning Yetzer Hara, that's a big, big battle. It's like a spiritual test. And the Alter says 1 second. If so, listen to these critical words. If so, every person must take into account who he is, where he is, and where on the ladder he stands in serving God. And then you must determine for yourself, am I serving God with anything comparable to such an intense battle and test? Alter says, let's think about this for a second. You're looking at a Jew who's spiritually and morally in the dumps. And what did we say? We said, you can't judge him. Why not? Because you don't even understand the intensity of his struggle. His moral and spiritual struggle is so intense you don't even understand it. So you can't judge him. But now the Alter starts turning the tables on you. The Alter says, 1 second. You're judging him for not showing up for his big, intense battles. What about you? What about your big, intense battles? Everybody has some area in life where they have to fight really hard to succeed. They have to fight really hard to not fall for the temptation of the Yetzer Hara. The Alter says, do you show up for the battle? You can say, of course, look at me, I'm beautiful. I'm a good Jew, I'm a spiritual, I do all the mitzvahs. Says the Alter, but no. Forget about the differences of circumstance. His battle could be that his battle with his Yetzer Hara is against the biggest sins. And if he loses his battles, he does massive sins. Maybe you happen to be privileged that your massive battles are for smaller sins. And your massive battles are for sins that nobody else notices. So, unfortunately for him, when he fails his big battles, everybody has to know about it. It ends up being printed in the newspapers. So therefore, it's easier for you to pounce on him and judge him. What about you? You happen to be fortunate and privileged that your big battles are in areas of life which are not as big sins. And if you fail those battles, no one's going to know about it. But do you show up for your battles? And the author is going to demonstrate how in even the most spiritually successful life, somebody does all these mitzvahs. The author says, but we are always letting go of the big battles. You see, there are some things in life which are easy for us to do. Maybe they take a little bit of effort. Maybe there's a mitzvah that we don't want to do. The Yetzer Hara is pushing us, don't do it. And we say, no, we'll push through. We still do it anyways, even though it's difficult for us. Let's call that a level 1 battle. Right? It's a level 1 battle. It's easy. Then there's something called level 10 battles. Level 10 battles are the most intense battles that we must face. The most intense spiritual and moral battles that we have to face. Where it's so difficult for us to make the right choice. And we literally have to use every ounce of willpower and stamina and spiritual strength inside of us to say no to our Yetzer Hara. Now, where that is in your life is going to be different. My big battles are personal to me. Your big battles are personal to you. The interesting thing is, the Alter says that some people's big battles are in the massive sins, adultery. This guy's challenge is adultery. That's his level 10 battle. It's so difficult for him to withstand that temptation. Maybe for me, my level 10 battle is to make sure that I'm davening properly every morning. The difference is that if I don't daven so nicely this morning, it still looks good. At least I davened. I didn't do any massive sin. I didn't murder anybody. So the author says, let's stop looking at what the specific sin is, and let's look at the general idea. How much are you showing up? How much energy are you bringing to the table? How much fight do you have inside of you? You're judging this other Jew for not fighting his fight. Says the Alter Rebbe, and do you show up for your fights? Maybe you're no better than him. When he doesn't show up for the fight, he does massive sins. And when you don't show up for the fight, it looks like no biggies. But it doesn't matter. The fact is, you don't need to show up for your fights. You also go the easy way. You'll fight level 1 fights. You'll fight level 2 battles. You're not going to fight level 10 battles. So the Alter says, you're going to judge that guy. You're just as bad as he is. But we're going to have to further develop this idea in next class. And dear friends, I want to conclude with a story. It's such a heartwarming story. And very much what the Alter is doing in this chapter is stop looking at the superficial count. How many mitzvahs do you have? How many sins do you have? Start looking at what's happening a little bit deeper. How much energy do you bring to the table? How much fight do you bring to the table? How hard are you working to really fight your Yetzer Hara and to give good choices and sacrifice for God? Make difficult choices for God. From the outside, if you just look at a count of mitzvahs, a religious Jew maybe looks better. But from a different perspective, maybe it's actually very, very different. So here's a little story to demonstrate that. I read the story shared by the Chabad Shliach in Antwerp, Belgium. Antwerp, Belgium has a very large Jewish community. We of course know there's a very large Jewish diamond district there. There's a Jew who's involved with Chabad, and he owned a jewelry shop, a diamond shop, in the diamond district in Antwerp. And he was growing in his Judaism, he was growing in his Yiddishkeit, and he decided to start keeping Shabbos. He's not going to go and open the shop on Shabbos. He was doing it for a few weeks, doing it for a few months. It was wonderful. But he knew when he made the commitment that the hardest Shabbos for him is going to be the Shabbos before New Year's. The Saturday before New Year's tradition in Antwerp is that everybody goes to the Diamond District and everybody buys new jewelry for their wives and for their daughters and their daughter-in-laws and their mothers. Oh. But he was committed to doing it. He wakes up that Shabbos morning, the Saturday morning before New Year's, and he's literally shaking. He knows that he's leaving thousands of dollars, tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table because people are coming there to shop and his shop is closed. And he's a nervous wreck on the inside. He goes to shul to daven. He's barely davening. He can't keep his focus. He just can't help but think. And he's just going through this. He has a storm brewing up inside of him. After davening, he says, you know what? I'm not going to go open up the shop. I just want to see what's happening downtown. Maybe there's actually not that much business. So he walks a few blocks from the shul to downtown. You know what he sees? He sees downtown is bustling. He sees every single store has business through the door. And like a sore thumb, his shop is there, shuttered. His mind is racing. He's in a daze. He literally sees the money slipping out of his hands. He doesn't know what to do. Maybe I should go open up the shop. Maybe I'll ask somebody else to. He literally doesn't know what to do with himself. He goes home. He says, no, I'm going to go home. I'm not opening up my shop. I committed. I'm going to keep Shabbos. He goes home, but he can't function. And he literally feels the temptation in him. Let me just go and open up the shop. I kept most of Shabbos already. Let's just go open up the shop. I'll make at least a little bit of money. He's going through this internal struggle, struggle. And that's it. He just gets up. He goes to the cabinet, takes out a bottle of vodka, pours up, finds the biggest glass in his house, fills it up, downs the entire cup of vodka, and stumbles like a drunk man into his bed, hits the sack, and he's out cold for the rest of the day. He wakes up at midnight a depressed man. The next day he goes to the rabbi, and he's emotionally choking up. And he says, Rabbi, I'm such a bad Jew. I tried keeping Shabbos. You want to know what type of Shabbos I had yesterday? Daven, I barely davened. I couldn't get my mind off the shop. I go home, I'm supposed to spend Shabbos with my family, with my wife and kids. You know what happened? Like a drunk peasant, like a lowlife, I just chugged down a cup of alcohol, and I slept out. He says, I didn't make any money, and I kept Shabbos. What type of Shabbos was that? And he's literally going through this turmoil. And the rabbi said that he got so emotional. He says, you're saying that you think you didn't keep a good Shabbos? You're coming and complaining to me that your Shabbos was a bad Shabbos? He says, when was the last time that I made such a strong sacrifice to keep Shabbos? I'm a rabbi. Yeah, on the outside, my Shabbos looked beautiful. I was davening, and I was singing, and I'm making Kiddush, and I'm learning, and I'm living up Shabbos. But who sacrificed more for Shabbos? Who sacrificed more for God? For me, keeping Shabbos, that was a no biggie. I'm used to it. For me, keeping Shabbos, I'm the rabbi of the synagogue. Yeah, it's easy. You're saying you didn't keep Shabbos properly? Your Shabbos was more beautiful than my Shabbos. Because you made the ultimate sacrifice. You went through that tremendous struggle. And you had such determination to not fall to the temptation. And if it meant chugging a cup of alcohol, you sacrificed it for Shabbos. And the rabbi shared, he just got so emotional. When was the last time that he, put so much effort and just willpower to do something for Hashem? I think that's the shift that the Alter is trying to make with us over here. If you look on the outside, you could have a Jew who says, yeah, I am much more Jewish. I'm a more successful Jew than this other person. But maybe that other person actually maybe works harder than you. And do you ever show up for your difficult battles that you expect him to show up for? Maybe not. So maybe you're just as bad as him. And dear friends, we're going to conclude over here. We still have a lot more to learn in this chapter, all about the theme of developing humility, true humility before all other people. And with that, we'll conclude for this evening. I want to wish you all a wonderful evening, a wonderful week, and a wonderful Yom Tov coming up. And with that, dear friends, I want to wish you all a wonderful evening. May God bless you all. And we'll see you all next week for part 2 of chapter 30. Yes, Joel.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Melky.
What does fear of God mean, the way they were talking here? What does fear mean?
Fear literally means simply to have the awareness of God's presence before you. Simply like this. You ever had that experience, you're like just sitting in a parking lot and you think no one's looking at you, and all of a sudden you notice that somebody's watching you? You're not doing anything wrong. You're not robbing the bank, but just it shakes you up, right? Somebody's watching me. I need to act differently. Sometimes people think, right, if you would just simply realize that God is watching you. God is a presence in your life.
It's fear of being killed or anything.
No, it doesn't mean that. It just simply means the awareness of God's presence. Yeah.
And one last question. What about judgment you were talking about? What about criminals who have to be sentenced because they did something wrong?
So leave that to the judge.
Leave that to the judge. Okay. But what if you're in the jury?
If you're on the jury, then that's your duty to do that. Then you have to judge, but not wanton judgment of another Jew.
Okay.
Even if they're a criminal.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Rabbi,
Absolutely.
what about, so you're saying don't judge a Jew, but don't judge anybody, correct?
Anybody. The wording of our sages is any human being.
Do you think it's human nature, though? Like this weekend, I had an experience where I met 2 different people, and I found myself judging them.
It's very much human nature to judge other people. We all do it. And we spoke at the beginning of the class, I don't know if you were here then, Hillary, of how it's built into the animal soul. The animal soul, it's like a coping mechanism of the animal soul to judge other people. So yeah, it's very normal. It's very natural. We all do it. We're on the same page. We all suffer from being humans. But at the same time, it's important to acknowledge our weaknesses, like that we know what we need to get over. And what the author is saying is judgment comes from the animal soul, and it's not a healthy thing. And it's illogical. Logical is that you cannot judge. So.
No, that makes sense. It was just so interesting that I had that experience, and then this was what was discussed today. So I find it very pointed. Thank you so much. Thank you, Rabbi.
Absolutely. Yeah, that happens many times, that something that you're about to learn or that you just learned, all of a sudden something happens in your life that plays into that. Yeah, I feel that happening also a lot.